In this LFA talk, we will explore examples of how care for the planet and consideration for the climate emergency can be embedded into projects, creating a greener London. This event is sponsored by Ibstock Brick. So thank you to Ibstock for supporting this series. And please, if you get a chance to follow them online, go to their website, or if you're in London, you can visit their store. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Tara Gbolade from Gbolade Design Studios, and she's going to talk to us about her Heritage Muse project in Croydon. Gbolade Design Studios put a design-led, sustainable, innovative, community-centered and commercially minded at the heart of what it does. They're an early signatory to the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge, and Tara will be presenting on the Heritage Muse, a compilation of 8-number high-quality townhouses designed to be highly sustainable, which is currently on site. So looking forward to hearing that. Tara, over to you.
So this is who we are, Gbolade Design Studio. We're a small practice based in London, in Waterloo. And as Diane said, we'll be talking about caring for our planet. As a practice, we specialize in a range of different project types, from traditional building projects, as many architects do, but we also do a lot of guidance work in terms of sustainability guidance for local authorities as well. This is a bit about our ethos, but what I want to focus on is here, the sustainable aspect, where we look at sustainability and we focus on sustainability as something that's looking across the themes of environmental as well as socio-economic sustainability. So therefore, really identifying themes along the lines of health and well-being and ensuring that communities feel like they have a voice and influence in their developments. So today I'll be talking about Heritage Muse. This is for a private developer client who bought the site post-planning and approached GDS to be responsible for technical design as well as managing it on site up until completion. The site is located in Crystal Palace, just on the corner of Beulah Hill towards the south and Hermitage Road on the east of the site. And there is a slope on site. It is a thin, long, narrow site in Crystal Palace and has a lot of residential developments overlooking it. So this is just to show you in context what the scheme is about. So there's a semi-detached unit on the left-hand side, followed by 5 terraces and a pair of detached unit followed by a pair of semi-Ds. Towards the rear, the scheme looks to, because we've got a lot of residential developments on the rear of the site, the scheme looks to angle certain bedrooms so there is minimal overlooking or no overlooking into the rear spaces. So that hopefully gives you a bit of context of where we are, car parking located as well to the west of the site. So when our clients approached us, we at first, even though they approached us for sustainable design, they didn't really have a definition of what that was going to look like. They didn't have any necessary performance standards. And so when we looked at the scheme, we suggested the RIBA 2030 climate target for them. We felt it was necessary for them to not just only say that they were going to develop highly sustainable developments, but also to stake a claim and choose a performance target to go after. To their credit, they did, and we agreed upon the RIBA 2030 climate challenge. The reason they didn't go for something like passive house is because they thought it was too cost prohibitive for the scale of development, because it is a small site, it is a small development. So here we are looking at hitting the 2030 targets across operational energy, embodied carbon, and potable water use, as well as, of course, the other sort of healthy building targets, including overheating, daylighting, CO2 levels. I'll explain these little diagrams and I'll go into a little bit more detail. Once we set ourselves on a target, we very quickly brought a sketch together to speak to our clients to try and help them understand what that meant when it really came to operational energy, embodied carbon, and therefore the construction methodology that we'd be looking at exploring. In the initial scheme, that the BIM model that I sort of spinned around, It was a planning stage, mainly brickwork with concrete, poured concrete suggested to the ground floor. One of the key moves we made here was to look at the construction methodology. We had a lot of conversation with our clients in trying to convince them to move towards a timber frame development rather than masonry. But due to the challenges in the market at the moment, certainly post Grenfell, and even though this is a low-rise building, they still decided to stick with masonry to the external skin. However, what we looked to do was have all our party walls, particularly within the terraces and semi-Ds, as timber frame construction. In addition, on the ground floor, where we originally had poured concrete, surface concrete, we looked to remove it and replace this with, and it's now been replaced with external plaster, which vastly reduces the embodied carbon impact. Some key moves we made, as many would be used to, is adopting a fabric first approach, of course. So a lot of the walls have a U value of 0.1, 0.11, walls, floors, roof, to ensure that we have a holistic approach to each thermal envelope. Windows and doors, and certainly windows, are triple glazed. Here we had to balance this out between triple glaze and the amount of embodied carbon that would come along with that versus overall performance as well. We're using an air source heat pump. We explored ground source and air source heat pump for this particular scheme, but ground source heat pump was, again, cost prohibitive, and particularly because we didn't have quite large gardens, so it was going to be a vertical installation, hence the reason we went for air source heat pump instead. We'll be having an MVHR system, as you'd expect, for high air quality internally. Looking at embodied carbon, one of the key aspects here we looked at was moving away from masonry to the timber, particularly for the party walls, but also the structure. We had quite a few and have quite a few conversations with our structural engineer, looking at, instead of having steel, having glulam beams in place of what would ordinarily have been steel. Where steel can't be avoided, we've opted for flitch beams, and then steel as a last resort. We also looked at our foundations. First of all, looking at simplifying a lot of the initial foundation design so that we basically have much less concrete in the ground to reduce our carbon impact in that way, but also ensure that our foundation concrete was low carbon by introducing 70% GGBS mix. And there's more to it, and this is on our website, so you can have a look on that as well. One of the key aspects that we did in trying to move our client from sort of traditional sort of brick and block work to looking at brick and timber instead was using the FCBS carbon calculator to very quickly and at a very high level look at what it would mean in terms of embodied carbon for our clients, with our overall goal of trying to go below 300. We didn't meet that. We are slightly higher than that, but starting with this process was really important to help the client see in real time, and we were sort of plugging numbers in, plugging different materials into the tools so the client could see in real time the impact it was having. And just here highlighting that the block work, of course, was going to have far more of an impact with embodied carbon than going with brick and timber. And that's an overall sort of summary page. And our operational energy, we did quite well and came down to 34. And actually, this was a very early design. And in fact, that has stuck, which is amazing. And the embodied carbon, we originally had it quite high, but that has come vastly down as well. And that's obviously working with the MEPH team. I'm not going to switch to the BIM model just because of time, but this is just to highlight that the scheme is currently on site. We do have a site eye, and in time we'll be able to sort of reel through the videos. But that's sort of the site looking in March earlier this year when we started on site. We started slightly earlier, but in March, and the aim is for the scheme to be complete in December. It's going to look like, I think, beginning of next year. But here in April, just looking at the contractors putting down the piling mats, foundations being dug, and now retaining walls being installed. Awesome, brilliant. Okay, cool. Some of the aspects we did was drop the floor level into the living room as you have without very much work, have really tall floor to ceiling heights, making the living room sort of more expansive, more spacious, has more volume than you ordinarily would expect, and also toward the rear it's a split level scheme running from the front to the rear of the site, where the rear of the site is about 1.5 meters lower than the front, with the sort of kitchen dining area, and our little sort of Zoom room is what we're calling it, and it will have a timber screen that allows the user to lock themselves away in a little box while they have meetings like this, because we felt it was important, obviously, to redesign the building in times for a post-COVID society, recognizing that a lot of people will be moving to hybrid ways of working and looking at ways of incorporating that into current design. And thank you. That's that. I am now going to.
Thanks, Tara. That was a really interesting presentation. Looking forward to seeing the finished building or some more updates. Maybe you'll be able to share with Riba London, and we can, or tag Riba London in on your Instagram posts and hashtag 2030 challenge or something, so we can pick it up and share it on our social media sites. Thank you so much, Tara. So next up we have Laetitia, and we have, excuse me, something just disappeared, and Catherine. And they will be presenting on the role of sustainability. They were presenting on the role of a sustainability consultant, setting targets, good practice and costs, etc. Catherine will be offering tips and advice on how to actually deliver sustainable schemes. Nice to meet you both. Please do inform us. How do we do it?
Hi everyone, I'm Laetitia Pancrazi, and I'm joined today by my colleague Catherine. I'll just quickly share my screen. And today, since we're surrounded by so many practitioner and architectural genius like Annalisa and Tara, we decided to take a slightly different approach to our presentation and talk about enabling mechanisms and the role of collaboration within the built environment. Great. So what is the role of built environment professionals, such as ourselves on the call today, to deliver and drive change? The first thing to know is that we are all facing a collective challenge, and so it's so important for us to work together. And what we found through the work that we've been delivering is that building these common frameworks, this common language, and this common way of working, collaborating together and having successful partnership is a lot more difficult than it seems. The built environment also has a collective duty to care. And this is because amongst all the professions that exist around the world, we have the ability to impact people's life. We have the ability to impact people's health, physical and mental, the type of jobs that they get, how much time they spend commuting, the level of pollution around their homes, their energy bills, and their economic well-being. This power that we have comes with great responsibility, and through good design, good architectural practices, and again, this word collaboration, we can actually deliver significant change to people's in their lives. And we also have a power to disrupt. And this is really important, particularly now with the net zero agenda. Architecture and engineering throughout history have been big drivers in improving people's health and well-being. And we are now at another disruptive moment in history where the net zero agenda requires us to innovate and disrupt across multiple systems. And the fact that this happens across multiple systems means that we need to collaborate. So rather than thinking of each system in silos, it's really important for us to set targets and set principles and set mechanisms that looks at the built environment as an entire entity. And this includes things like our energy systems, the transition to clean energy sources, the types of construction mechanisms that we're using and how we interact with our supply chains, the innovation and data-driven process that are changing how we interact with other businesses, but also with communities. And of course, as Tara has mentioned, the big challenge around embodied carbon and how to reduce the emissions associated with our materials and our construction process. And so in order to build this collaboration and be effective disruptor within the built environment, we strongly believe in the importance of having common language and common framework, which is why it's great to see another push for the Riba 2030 challenge, because this just allows for consistency in what we're pushing for, and it sends to our clients and to other people a very consistent message that this is best practice and that it can be achieved if we all work together. The other framework that we use, particularly most of my work focuses on working with local authorities, and the SDGs just offer a perfect platform to communicate communal goals in a simple and visual ways. But as Catherine will explain in her part of the presentation, these goals can be broken down, and you can actually, no matter what your position or your role is, have an impact on all of these different goals. We've also developed other frameworks, including an enabling strategy. And this is really important. A lot of the work we do is having direct impact on the built environment. And this is leading to high carbon reduction, for example, with better building materials, better processes, but also through, as I said, embedding sustainable transport mechanisms or sustainable energy systems. But there's a suite of other mechanisms that as built environment professionals we can put in place. And this is what we've called our enabling levers. And this is governance, the skills, policy, financial capital, and information. And just a quick whistle tour through them. Around policy, it's really important to have consistency. And again, this is where collaboration and common language and setting common targets are so important. If the policy landscape is fragmented, it makes it a lot more difficult to steer change forward. Around governance, collaboration is really important, and this includes having different collaborative models, delivering in different ways, mobilizing your supply chain so that they're involved from the beginning of the process. And we've seen that this is one of the key ways to get different supply chains and everyone involved in the construction industry on board, which in turn reduces the cost of delivering net zero buildings. There's also been a lot of new development in the finance industry with new models, new green bonds and different community funds that are being released to encourage more green growth. And this is something else that we need to be aware of and that we can tap into. Skills is probably one of the most important enablers. I always refer to this study by Helen Evans, a Passive House expert, of how by building the skills and competence of people around passive design, you can actually deliver passive homes at no additional cost. And building the skills of everyone around you means that sustainability can be embedded in your operations. And finally, data is key. Sharing data, sharing best practice, making sure that this is accessible and free is one of the best ways to make sure that we can continue to drive change within the industry.
Thank you, Laetitia, and thank you everyone for the invitation and for joining this evening. So just to pick up on what Laetitia's been talking about, we, maybe it's the next slide is best to go to. We're actually colleagues, Laetitia and I, of part of a greater group called the Useful Simple Trust, but we're actually from different brands within that collective. It's a sort of co-op of different brands and industries, including engineering, communication design, sustainability consultancy, which is where Laetitia sits, an engineering education group called Think Up, and then the studio, which I lead and founded, which is an architectural practice. And we were founded 12 years ago as an employee benefit trust with a sort of common purpose to blaze a trail. And it's always been interested in innovation and ethical purpose. And I suppose the notion of whatever we do ought to do good. And often that means beyond the project or within the wider community or for the environment and both natural and built. And I guess that's to reinforce, I suppose, this notion of the collective, which Laetitia was talking about. We started with our business, and now we're trying to do that through our projects. So next slide, please. We are a B Corporation. We were certified in December, and I mean, really, we already had a lot of the drivers and a lot of the sort of policy and purpose and characteristics of a B Corp. But it was a natural thing to sort of test our purpose through the certification process, which was quite onerous. And it's now become a very useful kind of community for us because it's global. There are 4,000 members representing many, many different industries. And we're finding that through that community, we can have this wider purpose and be even more effective. Next slide. One of the things that we did, and this is linking into the SDGs, is that we, to sort of align ourselves, because we could become quite scattergun, being this kind of all these different industries and brands within this single pot. We began to align the businesses along 4 themes, which were drivers and sustainability, and then track those to the SDGs. And this was to find this common language and be able to help us in our purpose, but also to help us communicate with each other and externally. Next slide. And quite helpfully, the B Corp site, and these tools are available and free to anybody. So I recommend you go in and have a look, because they're great. They're really quite sophisticated tools in enabling a self-assessment. So they have something called an impact assessment, which is the first tool, which tracks your performance against community, yourselves, and the environment. But beyond that, they have another tool called the SDG Action Manager, which is the Sustainability Development Goal Manager. And it's quite an in-depth tool. On the surface, it just highlights the 17 goals. But it then asks you a series of questions, and in asking you those questions, you're able to assess your performance. But also what you soon realize is that areas where you thought you wouldn't be having an impact, for example, life underwater, you know, how is my beautiful residential scheme that was shown earlier, you know, how could that have an impact in terms of the well-being of fish in the ocean? But you find that there are little strands in your work that have this kind of wider ripple effect in terms of impact. And so the depth of the tool is quite sophisticated, and realizing you can do more than originally thought. Next slide. All throughout the tool, it's reinforcing the importance of collective action. Again, what Laetitia touched on, I suppose, the theme of our pitch here. And it speaks about the importance of policy and uniting around policy, around campaigning, and also working together to progress the supply chain, both for your own internal purchasing, but also through your projects. Next slide. And within the tool, I talked about a series of layers. It gives you an explanation. So there's always in-depth explanation of each question. There are always examples which are offered, and there are always tips about how to implement. So it can be a very proactive piece of software to support you. And next slide. But what it also does, and this we felt was an important thing to do, is it doesn't just ask you about what you're doing, which is good. You know, you can get quite complacent in answering a series of things and thinking we're performing well. But after a while, it reminds you to also reflect on what you might be doing to undermine a particular goal, and sort of asking, you know, where's the risk in your industry? And you then have to reflect on the fact that the construction industry is in fact very intensive in terms of energy emissions and water use. So while performing, you also ask yourself, where am I undermining, and what can we do as a collective to resolve that and improve in that area? Next slide. So just very quickly, a couple little examples. We didn't want to talk a lot about ourselves, but these are sort of a bit non-standard in terms of examples. One that which really enabled the trust to sort of raise our game and pull in the collective of all the different strands was Goal 9, Industry, Innovation and Infrastructure. And this is around building resilient infrastructure. We do a lot in infrastructure with civil and structural engineering, and myself, Bridges, in the studio. But it's to promote a more inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovation, which we've gone further with. And there are 2 just very quick examples. Next slide. We partnered here with a number of higher institutions, to investigate how to do a more sophisticated and innovative beam. In this case, it was a cantilevered beam, to just reduce material. A lot of the material in superstructure is driven by regulations and code, and a lot of it is not doing anything under particular conditions. So we try to pare it back to the ultimate thinnest possible cantilever and resist loads through dynamics and dampers. And this is a prototype that we built called the Adaptive Truss. And this maps to a sub-goal of SDG 9, which is to upgrade industries and infrastructure for sustainability. So we're looking at a beam in this case. And the next example, and this is SDG 9.5, enhance research and upgrade industrial technologies. So in this instance, we again tapping into, I think Thomas Matthews, in fact, I think all the brands are working on this particular project as a total collective of architecture, engineering, communication, and sustainable consultancy, partnering with industry, in this case, aluminium and stainless steel fabricators, to produce a flat pack footbridge. So through this, we've been able to sort of really dig deep into the design, avoiding procurement and tendering, and remove every single piece of superfluous stuff, and really interrogate the detailing to minimize carbon, simplify installation, reduce procurement times, reduce installation times in this kind of pursuit of supporting this particular goal. Just a couple little examples, and I'll end it there. Hopefully we're on time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine and Laetitia. Really informative. It's really great to know that there's so much resources available which are just there, free. So it's just a case of where to go. So thanks for highlighting and informing everyone. Just going to take a little bit of a 2-second commercial break just to say again, thank you to our sponsors, Ibstock Brick, and for those of you that have signed up to the 2030 challenge. Thank you. It will be really good to just know how you're doing so far. Just pop it in the chat. Those of you that haven't but are considering it, again, pop your name in the chat so we can look to contact you after. Right. So our next speaker is Penn and Annalisa Mcsweeney, and they're going to discuss what care means for our city, what ACAN and the climate movement are doing about it, and the legacy they want to leave behind. So Jo and Annalisa, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, thanks Diane, and thank you so much for having us to speak. There's a lot of overlap with what we've just seen from Useful, Simple, Trust, but hopefully we can show some of the thoughts that we're having within ACAN. And I'm sure many of you are familiar, but we are currently living in a geological age known as the Anthropocene. So this is the era that's defined as when human activity has been the dominant influence on Earth's climate and environment. Indeed, last year, human-made mass reached over 1 trillion tons, which means that it finally exceeded the entire biomass of the natural world. And our endless drive for growth and consumption has beaten nature back and pushed the planet's life support systems to the edge. So when did we stop viewing our collective home as a natural wonder and begin to see it as something to be controlled, dominated, and exploited for personal gain? Let's take this time to reflect on the true impact of human development and how, in order to care for our planet, we must reconsider how we evaluate success.
So, how did we get here? We'll first look at Decarbonise Now, ACAN's first aim. Like so many cities, London was shaped significantly by fossil fuels. Coal, which was used to light and heat homes and power great transportation networks, also provided the energy to fire up furnaces and factories, delivering steel and brick in vast quantities. Concrete soon became ubiquitous too, with glass and aluminium hitting high times in the early 20th century. But our extensive use of high embodied carbon materials has led to a construction industry with an enormous carbon footprint, accounting for 40% of total UK emissions. Good news, however, we already have the tools, technology and knowledge to build low carbon. We just lack the policy and political willpower to incentivise it. This is where ACAN comes in. ACAN is currently campaigning for the introduction of legislation that will ensure embodied carbon is first calculated and then reduced, both locally and nationally. Policy SI2 in the New London Plan has already introduced this for referable projects. Our guide for policymakers, template letters and petition are all available on our website. Do please support those. Our existing building groups have 2 campaigns. First of all, Households Declare, a website and awareness campaign providing a platform for all households to demand the tools and resources necessary to reduce the energy consumption of our homes. It will be going live soon. The CPR, Conservation Planning Reform Campaign, is fighting to enable designated conservation areas to achieve carbon neutrality in line with UK targets. One outcome will be a guide to climate-appropriate retrofitting of heritage buildings. Yet, despite the vast amounts of energy that go into building products, 60% of total waste generated in the UK comes from construction and demolition. ACAN is campaigning for a 9th stage in the RIBA plan of work to close the loop on construction materials and kickstart the circular economy. Our fantastic CPD series, involving many experts, is now available in full on YouTube. But what does this mean for cities? Designers, builders, planners and clients are all complicit in prolonging the use of default methods and materials left as a ghost in our industrial past. Now is the time to question our legacy and to build with natural and local materials, which are low impact as well as low carbon. Two quick examples: the rammed earth pavilions of Bushy New Cemetery by War Thistleton, and the flat house by Practice Architecture, insulated and clad in hemp grown where the house now stands. We also need degrowth, but degrowth is not only about building less, smaller and more efficiently, but so much more. It is about building differently, according to social need rather than economic profit. It confronts the association of growth with good in order to open up alternative ways of organising societies, such as moving from a system of private ownership to the cultivation of shared amenity spaces. What's the problem? This is a biodiversity as well as an ecological crisis. We've been living out of balance, consuming nature faster than it can replenish itself. Our profession is too preoccupied with individual buildings and forgets the bigger picture. We need to examine the full supply chain and understand all components to realise the full impact of our profession. Where are those minerals and materials mined? Or the sand for the concrete for that matter? Is that timber local and from biodiverse woodland? Architects are not ecologists, so we need to integrate them as early as possible too. How is the climate movement working to change this? Well, in 2019, Parliament did declare a climate emergency and revised targets to the Climate Change Act. However, this legislation addresses only net emissions reductions, nothing to do with rampant biodiversity loss. Enter the Climate and Ecological Bill. Drafted by scientists, legal experts, economists and environmentalists, this bill is designed specifically to reverse the climate and ecological breakdown we face. The bill demands the UK take responsibility for all our greenhouse gas emissions, actively restore biodiverse habitats and stop damage to the environment through our consumption. There are also changes to the RIBA and ARB Code of Conduct to strengthen environmental protection and prioritise the care of duty to the public good. Our Where the Wild Things Aren't group has consulted with DEFRA following the response to the England Tree Strategy and is building biodiversity considerations into all our campaigns and our theory of change. Our most recent group, Natural Materials, are currently focused on a natural materials library, bringing together sources, properties and suppliers in order to support the specification of natural materials and products.
So we talk a lot in ACAN about how we must consider where our leverage is as professional activists. Activism can take many forms, from getting out in the streets and attending a protest to specifying a low carbon material on your project. And meaningful action can take place in conversations, crits and meetings. We really have to take every possible step to help nature restore itself wherever we can. So how do we do this in the city? Well, let's imagine a city that is no longer distinct from our natural environment and instead modelled on the structure of a self-sustaining ecosystem. This city is not just carbon neutral, but it's regenerative, producing and using renewable energy. This energy and water are both used efficiently, and recycling and reuse creates a zero waste system. Our ideal city obtains its resources for building and produces food locally, restoring what's consumed. It restores environmentally damaged areas and reintegrates habitats, welcoming wildlife back into the city. And our daily needs are within walking or cycling distance and otherwise reached by low carbon public transportation systems. So policy is emerging in recognition that achieving such a city is not idealistic, but necessary if we're going to mitigate climate breakdown. Plants and nature-based systems create healthier cities that are better adapted to changing weather patterns. Sustainable urban drainage, for example, protects against flooding. Replacing asphalt and concrete with soft landscaping reduces the heat island effect. And trees and air pollution, whilst making our streets more attractive places for our communities, are reducing air pollution. That's trees. So the transformation towards a low carbon economy must pay careful consideration to land stewardship and resource management. Skellefteå in northern Sweden has a leading position in the country's wood processing industry, giving it expansive spruce and pine forests. In 2014, the municipality mandated that wood should be the first choice for all public sector building and infrastructure projects, wherever this is viable, and so promoting sustainable timber construction. So now's the time to build a new localism, developing architecture rooted in the understanding of climate risks, choosing materials which are close to our sites, and building up relationships with local builders and suppliers, supporting local economies and job creation. We know that policy has created successful change in response to past crises. It was the London smog in 1952 that prompted policymakers to introduce the first Clean Air Act. It was during the 1800s that city planners began to introduce more parks to combat poor health. Green space policies have been used by city governments across Europe to incentivize biodiversity for anything from animal habitats to native planting. In Malmö, we see here a green space factor was introduced for the Bo1 housing exposition, which aimed to be the first carbon neutral neighbourhood powered by wind and heated by geothermal. Developments had to set aside a share of their footprint as green space, and biodiversity bonus points were awarded for features such as fruiting trees or ponds. The result gave green and characterful social spaces and parks that were not closed off, but fully integrated into the public realm. This urban greening factor has inspired the new London plan, but its success will require a proactive and collaborative design approach. We really need to improve ecological expertise as designers, to make informed decisions at early stages in our projects, and to provide specific spaces that are of genuine value to wildlife and people. Without a holistic planning approach, such policies risk being exploited. And this is why we need cultural transformation, which is ACAN's third aim. We know that when money is the measure of success, it gives perverse incentives, especially in the construction industry, where the old adage that time is money still applies. We need to redirect our economy from endless growth to one which serves to deliver quality of life. We must also think how this economic success is distributed and take action towards climate justice, a movement with people and communities most vulnerable to climate impact at its heart. Kate Raworth's donut model gives a new shape to economic success. That doughy ring forms a sweet spot that meets the needs of all people within the means of the planet. This donut is a bit less of you are what you eat, and a bit more of what you measure shapes how we act. So we've discussed how our professional decisions impact climate and the natural world, but they also affect behaviours, determining our energy demand, our transport choices, and our participation in local life. In turn, this affects health, affordability, belonging. Wales have legislated long-term decision-making in the Future Generations Act. And as architecture is the legacy that we leave behind us as humans through time, it really deserves that same endurance of thought. So what does this mean for ACAN and the climate movement in London? Well, Newham Council have introduced a recovery and reorientation strategy that puts well-being and happiness at the core measure in planning for economic success. Neighbourhood-based citizens' assemblies determine how the SIL money community infrastructure levy money should be spent. Such participation in budgeting and decision-making promotes stewardship and long-term care of our natural and built environment, and should be integral to our design processes too. The culture within architecture is practiced is also important to the kinds of places we design. We need to actively include diverse voices and experiences to deliver inclusive places. ACAN's ways of practicing include radical listening and consensus decision-making to ensure that the relevant stakeholders are present and that everyone's voices are heard. And we work by a set of principles requiring systemic change, open collaboration, honesty, transparency, and inclusivity.
We have presented ACAN's aims and principles and hope and to encourage that these are adopted throughout architectural practice and the construction industry. We need to promote greater collaboration across client and design teams, to conduct POE and share our learnings, not only when we get it wrong, but celebrating when we get it right. We have begun to measure carbon, embodied and operational, and we need to find similar standards for measuring well-being. We have seen examples of authorities leading the way, such as New Zealand with their Living Standards Framework dashboard for measuring well-being. Such measures will require wide recognition in order to achieve cultural change. An encouraging move towards open source information sharing can be felt across the climate movement and the industry, and ACAN is helping to support this. Nothing is more inspiring than peer-to-peer learning, and we need to dare each other to innovate. Let's all sign up to the 2030 challenge and compete to provide the most sustainable products that we can. Within ACAN, we are using our leverage as a group of professionals to engage actively with issues we face in our industry and change the landscape in which we practice. Please do come along to a meeting if you would like to get involved. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph, and thanks, Annalisa. Some really insightful and kind of bringing home the serious reality of what we've done, but also there's hope in terms of what we can do to rectify that. So thank you for bringing that to us. I mean, at the end of the day, we are all responsible, and thanks, Joseph, for the call to action to join the 2030 climate action, and also the other networks that are there to kind of work towards and support that. So thank you both. Just to say to everyone out there, if you do have a question for any of our speakers, please pop it in the chat. We have one more presentation and then we're going to open the floor up to questions. We have some questions already, but please put your questions in the chat. So our final speaker or speakers is Studio Bark, and this is a project which is really close to our heart. We're actually sponsoring and supporting Studio Bark in delivering this really this really kind of diverse and challenging and ambitious project. They were presenting their new project, No Build as Usual. No Build as Usual is a cross-sector live build summer school addressing diversity and the climate emergency. Studio Bark are coordinating the project and are working with a student steering group to remove barriers to live build participation, many of which reflect individual students' challenges to enter the sector. This summer, I think it started on Sunday, the diverse team of 10 to 12 students will build a new home in rural Herefordshire, living and working on site for the duration of the 10-week build. And like I said, they started on Sunday, so I guess the shock of their current reality is hitting them. But without further ado, Wilf and Sarah, over to you.
Collaborative live build initiative, coined No Building as Usual. I will begin with Horizon 1, Business as Usual, then move on to Horizon 2, Disruptive Innovation, and we'll finish on Horizon 3, the Emerging Future. So, Horizon 1, business, or in this case, building as usual. Let's take, for example, a community that needs housing. They have a pot, or in this case, a pie of money, and maybe the council have even given them a site. They have a dream to build spacious, light-filled, zero-carbon homes, but the council are worried they don't have the skills and knowledge to deliver it. Along comes a developer who takes a risk in return for the profit. That developer wants to limit his risk, therefore he employs a project manager who takes further risk, again in reward for profit. The project manager employs a cost consultant and then an architect and an engineer who also take their piece of the risk in return for their piece of the pie. Here begins the inevitable snowball effect of risk, liability, and ultimately litigation mitigation, reducing the pie to crumbs and the dream to a nightmare. Let's now look at Horizon 2, disruptive innovation using MMC, modern methods of construction, as a broad analogy. The developer might say, look, technology has made this much simpler and therefore cheaper. And the council replies, great, that means truly affordable housing. Planning approved. The existing housing stock is demolished and the construction waste is sent to landfill. However, thanks to MMC, a disruptive technological innovation, new affordable housing is built in its place and the local community move back into their new homes. Stop the bus! We are operating within a degenerative and hierarchical economy where the market rules the day. These new flats are desirable and are purchased off-plan on the open market by overseas investors. Instead, the community is displaced and the developer and his team drive away with the profits. In 2019, the 9 largest house builders paid out £2.3 billion in dividends to their shareholders. The cost to them of roughly 20,000 new family homes. Now, on the flip side, Horizon 2, the same disruptive innovation, MMC, but not driven by profits for shareholders and instead born through education. This is no building as usual. In this case, we are using an MMC system designed specifically for self-build community construction and the transition to a circular economy. This doesn't mean lots of consultant contracts and developer speculation, but instead radical collaboration between construction practitioners, representing a diverse spectrum of races, genders, and social classes. Because this risk is shared, so are the profits, resulting in a distributive and regenerative economic microclimate. Lastly, let's look at Horizon 3, Emerging Future. No Building as Usual is a real-life demonstrator project starting on site in June this year. Through building in this radically collaborative way, we don't have to dilute the environmental ambition and can deliver a building that has no concrete, it has no steel structure, it creates no site waste, but does use a demountable foundation system, does use reclaimed railway sleepers for retaining walls, does use natural carbon sequestering materials, does include a green roof, does include native climbing plants for seasonal solar shading, does include triple glazed timber windows, does include great natural daylight and ventilation through a central courtyard, does include open book monetary and carbon cost reporting, all for less money than your developer-led carbon-hungry box and by a group of people more representative of the communities in which these buildings are built. As architects, we have agency to change the system. We must start refusing degenerative projects backed by fossil fuel investors or weapon trade hedge funders. We need to shift our mentality to risk, and we need to start working together to foster distributive and regenerative architectural projects. We need to start putting people ahead of profits and the natural environment ahead of consumerism and creature comforts. It's time to shape the emerging future that we all want to see. It's time for no building as usual. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I have previously had the chance to participate in live builds at university and with Studio Bark, which I have found to be integral to my education. However, there are limited opportunities to gain hands-on experience, let alone for people from underrepresented backgrounds or where costs aren't prohibitive. There are many people of colour whose career progression is hindered by a lack of recognition in this industry, so it's essential that new systems are put into place.
As a student, I would have loved to see more opportunities to build on design skills as well as site working experience. However, when these opportunities were available, they weren't always accessible to people like me because they ended up being exclusive and expensive. What we're asking of you is just under £2,000 to sponsor one student, and this money will cover all the costs for the duration of the 10-week programme. We're also asking for your time to mentor your student beneficiary over the course of the whole programme.
Okay, thank you very much for listening to that, especially those who might have seen that before. But yeah, so that was a kind of an idea that we've had for a while, and kind of, I guess, through furlough, when we were really scrabbling around to kind of keep busy and sane, we kind of looked more at how No Building as Usual could develop as a kind of friendly franchise model for other practices to start running live build projects, and maybe running them with real projects, because sometimes, well, they often end up being kind of very interesting, very fun folly projects, but maybe not so meaningful as building a real house for a real couple who really need it. So I'll show a little bit more information about the project, and then I'm going to go on a bit of a walk around. So I hope that works. I'll try and keep out the sun. Yeah, just on the site, I mean, you can see here it's a beautiful setting in Herefordshire, very, very green, and we were always very scared of damaging that greenery. So we tried our best to avoid that with the design process. The couple, the client, are an amazing couple. They've fostered 15 children in their life. Francine's been disabled from birth. Sadly, a few years ago, Stephen, her husband, got diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and they pretty much had to shelve the project. So the only way we could actually make this project work, especially amid rising building costs, was to look at a way that we could give our time to education in return for the students to give back labour effectively to the clients. So it's a not-for-profit project, but one that we kind of feel very passionately about. So just a kind of couple of things about the house, and then I'll go and show you the site. This is a kind of no concrete building, and we've been fighting our groundworks contractor from the beginning. I think he now gets it. But so we're using a kind of unique foundation design system for the kind of the temporary building market generally. We're also using our own timber frame system called U-Build, which is designed for disassembly and the circular economy. Obviously, fabric first approach again, so we've got 300 mil of sheep's wool insulation. We're using kind of natural timber cladding, decking, trellising. We're actually running the house on a lot of on solar panels, but also looking to be one of the first houses that are heated and run on a DC electric current. We're working with some very interesting specialists to do that. And we've also integrated the planting for seasonal solar shading. It's also got a green roof. So a few things there that we're kind of innovating on. In terms of a building, it's incredibly simple. We're kind of really trying to de-architect it. It's all about accessibility around this kind of U-shaped kind of access zone, and then a kind of central courtyard, and everything's really about the way that Francine, our client, would like to move around the house. So I think I'm now going to show you a little bit of behind the hood stuff about actually how to run these projects, because they're quite difficult and they take a lot of coordination because you've got a lot of different people. So a few things I was going to show you was, yeah, so if we go to the map. Yeah, so this is basically the site in total. This is on the right-hand side is where the building will be. I'm currently sat in this little site out here. And then we have a couple of old farm buildings that we've cleared out and turned into a temporary kind of flying factory. That's got a bit of work to do. We've only been here 3 days. And then down in this field where there's a campsite, the students are hoping to have finished their showers today so they can have a shower. And the toilet is almost there too. And then we're creating a kind of semi-permanent barn there for cooking and community, really. A little bit more information about the students. We actually had 120 applicants for 12 places, and this was the kind of the different range of ethnicities that the applications were. We took a lot of effort to try and look in different places, and had some great support from Riba and Diane on that.
and these are the kind of student ethnicities that we've actually picked. So quite a broad range of different ethnicities, especially in rural Herefordshire. We've also had more than 60% female applications, which is fantastic. That's a real massive problem in the construction sector, particularly on site. So really keen to get to kind of encourage more women to get on building sites. And as a result, we've got only 3 guys out of our 12 here, and that's just been fantastic so far.
It's working.
Okay, great. So it's quite sunny, so I'm going to try and walk towards the sun and not trip up. So yeah, this is actually what's our fire emergency point, but it's also the very first U-build prototype about 5 years ago that we built in a community centre in East London. It's now been on kind of 4 different sites. So as we come down, this is the kind of sleepy village of Aston Cruise. There's about 30 or 40 houses and quite a nice pub, which we haven't frequented very often yet, but would love to. And then I'm just going to step down slightly, say jump down onto the retaining wall. Okay. Oops. I don't know if anyone can see this, but basically this is the pad for where our building will go. So this is all recycled hardcore from a farm just down the road that's been compacted in the ground, and then all around along the back, because we have about a 2 to 2.5 metre slope, and we've got these old sleeper retaining walls. So they come from a railway near here. I think it's a Great Western Railway type line. Now the problem about these sleepers is that they're full of creosote, so they don't really go anywhere. They just sit there and they do leach a bit. But our kind of feeling is that they're doing the damage anyway, so let's use them at the same time. So fairly cost effective and incredibly low carbon because we're just using a reclaimed material. I'm quickly going to show the foundations for the build. These are called jack pad foundations. They are basically recycled plastic and rubber feet. I don't know if you can see that yet, with a kind of metal shoe, and that metal shoe then takes the timber substructure. There's a number of advantages to that. It's obviously no concrete, circular economy, and secondly that you actually maintain some habitat below, and creepy crawlies and all sorts can kind of move around in that. It also obviously helps to reduce kind of the impacts of flash flooding because you're not putting so much concrete in the ground. Right, I'm going to go now head towards our workshop zone, which used to house a number of sheep. Luckily they've been kicked into the fields because it's warm enough. You can probably just about see the site behind me. Right, so now there's a beautiful old ash tree here, which has been our saviour because it's been keeping us nice and cool. This is our temporary cooking arrangement, given we've only been here 3 days. Not ideal for 3 people. That's our sewage tank. And here we go. We are into the workshop zone. Well, these are the old sheds, farm sheds, and this is the proper workshop zone. And we've got some of our students who are busy, and Sarah, preparing dinner. So this is where the magic happens. Cooking, what's that? What have we got on today? We've got pineapple, amazing.
We've got some pineapples going on here.
Great.
Bean salad.
Wow, mixed bean salad, pineapple, yeah, okay. Great. So that's that. And then we have our kind of U-build box building zone, which will arrive all on Friday. We've got a truss that's been made by a second-year engineering student that we're going to use for our barn, and then this will be the kind of main kind of workshop space where we're going to cut things up, basically. So that's going to be the workshop, and I'm going to walk now past the pony. He's very friendly, and hopefully show you the almost finished showers and toilet. Right. The pony is very nice, but the problem about the pony is that it attracts many horseflies, which have a very nasty bite. But I will go and say hello for everyone's benefit if I've still got internet. I don't know the name of the pony, but you're meant to always approach not from the back, I've heard. Very friendly. Okay, well, I'm going to go down. Bye-bye, pony. Okay, that's the pony. Right, so we've got Matt there digging some foundations. So we're using the same sleeper foundation system for the barn. All the rejects are a little bit rough than we're using for this kind of temporary barn. We've had a groundworks contractor on site yesterday with a mini digger, so showing how that process works, the various considerations with doing groundworks and doing foundations. So, I hope someone was in the shower. Okay, no, they're not. Right, nearly there. So, here we go. This is barn build, and these are sleeper piles. So, I don't know if anyone wants to say what's going on here quickly. Okay, Matt, who's a 6-year student from Sheffield.
Hello. Actually, the sun's behind me.
Yeah, let's go that way. Okay.
Hello. Oh, that's so bright. Yeah, so we've just been marking out and setting out the piles for the barn, and I've been working with the contractor Mark to like dig the holes, and he's taught me how to use a laser measurer for levels, and we've just been marking out string lines and making sure things are level. Yeah, and then it's a sort of a split level barn in the floor plate, so and making sure there's level access and things like that.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. We're going to go and just see what everyone's doing over here quickly. All right. You don't have to say anything if you don't want, guys, but this is Ada and Salome, and they are ramming the ground, ramming the earth.
Yeah, basically just trying to make it stable so that we can put the planks and have a leveling and make sure everything's basically just I'm trying to be perfect, but yeah, or close to perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a lot of discussions in the group about what needs to be perfect and what just needs to be quick, and that's kind of the reality of construction sites. But
What's
yeah,
your favourite kind of what were you saying? You've got a time.
quality versus time.
Quality versus time.
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure that out, and then yeah.
Yeah, that's a very hard one for architects because it's normally quality. And then very quickly, so I know we're running out of time, I'm just going to go and have a look at the showers quickly.
Rush.
Right. Okay. This is the shower. Mercedes just doing the finishing touches. He's going to be first to have a go. Look at that. That looks lovely. So Hessian, pallets, and just waste timber.
Human waste, which was meant to be 2 different holes. So we've got a tub in there that curves so that you can to separate the two because they react to gravity differently. But that was meant to be originally 2 different holes, but now we've only got 1 hole. But we're planning to use, because we'll have to transfer this whole contraption over there. We're planning to change this so that we can have 2 separate zones to control the smell.
Great.
Yeah, this is.
All right, thank you very much. And then this is the campsite. I'm not going to go into detail, but there's lots of tents and it's a beautiful countryside. Okay, I hope that kind of works, or I might have been talking to myself for hours.
No, we just lost it for a bit towards the end.
Okay.
Otherwise, it was brilliant. I mean, it's
Cool.
really good to see the students actually. I mean, it's all right talking about it and talking about camping and stuff like that, but to actually see them like hands on. And dirty already, only after day 3. They're not going to get a shower until the shower's built.
Well, exactly, yeah. No, we had to give them our shower, sadly, for the first couple of nights.
Brilliant. So we've got about 45 minutes for Q&A. So once again, before I forget, if anybody wants to sponsor a student for the No Building as Usual project, you've seen them now, you've seen what they're going through, so please donate generously. Wilf, when you're back in the studio, maybe you can drop the link to the GoFundMe site. Perfect. And so let's get to the Q&A session. If you're still on here, audience, please drop us a question. Haven't seen anything come up so far, but I do have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with asking Tara the first question, and then anybody else can kind of jump in on that. But Tara, you mentioned earlier that your client came to you with regards to sustainability in mind, but on other projects, because I know kind of that's sustainability is kind of your key focus. On other projects, how do you talk to client about the value of putting sustainability first?
Good question. And I'll steal a bit from Laetitia and Annalisa, actually. I try to put it in context. So this evening, obviously I didn't, because I knew they'd be speaking on the wider context, but I tend to give our clients a little bit more of that wider context, because a lot of our, and I guess it depends on the type of client. With our public sector clients, that type of context is really useful. With our private sector clients, we tend to lead from the angle of being a market leader, of looking at high quality homes that are likely to sell quicker, and outperform the competition, the local competition. And for us, it really is about trying to speak their own language. Even though we have our own ambitions, which is obviously a more sustainable development, even though we have our own ambitions, we tend to tweak the language we use depending on the type of client. Ultimately, they all come to the sort of final end goal, if you like, more and more moving towards regenerative design. But I guess what we choose to highlight depends on the clients we're speaking to. With Hermitage Muse, that clients, to their credit, they came to us for general sustainability sort of work. I didn't go into quite a lot of information there, but what we were able to do was sort of educate them as part of the process. So we spent a good few weeks in the beginning, not designing anything, but having lots of meetings like this, just talking about the value of sustainability, why it was important for them to get on board. And we felt that that was necessary to do at that stage, because now we're on site and questions and new team members are coming up and questions are flying about why we're using timber instead of steel, and why we're using timber instead of masonry and other bits. Actually, we find that our clients is doing a lot of the answering of those questions for us, having to argue so hard at this stage, because there was a whole education piece that was done in the beginning. Also, holding them to a standard like that IBA 2030, it's quite easy to say, well, if we change that material, we don't meet our standard, so it's your choice. How do you want to sell this product at when you come to the end of 6 months or 12 months from now? It's your choice on how you want to sell this product, considering all your advertisement has gone up. So I think having a clear sort of stick, if you like, has been really useful. And the clients have been amazing, to be honest, in jumping on board and actually wanting really great quality places to build.
Thanks, Tara. Does anyone else want to add to that? I'll take that as a no. Tara answered. That was a very detailed answer there. Thanks, Tara. I have another question here. Do you think the pandemic has presented an opportunity for London to be adapted and redesigned to become more sustainable and rewilded? That's open to anyone.
I mean, I can speak a bit to that, but I mean, it did definitely show us how quickly we can act and how things to change are possible. Like that's been spoken about quite a lot. And I think something that I feel it's opened up a space for is that kind of emergency state. We've realized what it is to kind of act in emergency and what that means to act in solidarity and to create networks for each other. And I think if we harness that energy now before we lose that momentum, then we can divert it and make sure it's focused more on these other issues that we are facing in the climate crisis. And I think all the things that we've spoken about, the importance of access to green space and other things that have become more important to us, have really become more part of common dialogue in the news and everything. So I really think that there is hopefully some positives to come forwards from it.
If I can add onto what Annalisa said, I think the conversation around the co-benefits has also changed a lot since the pandemic, linked to wanting to improve health and well-being and ensure that people have access to green spaces. There's more of an understanding that sustainability is about more than just the environmental sphere and reducing carbon. It's actually the benefits that it delivers to people and how we occupy space. And then obviously now with everything happening and the sort of going back to normal, how we're going to repurpose some of that space and making sure that we're making the right decision now and we don't end up in 20 years with infrastructure or buildings that no longer serve their purpose or have expensed a huge amount of carbon that could have been saved.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of other things as well. I think it's been a really good point to reflect on our neighbourhoods. And I think we've all spent a lot more time in our local areas and come to appreciate, you know, the good and the bad of those places. And in another way, the low traffic neighbourhoods, you know, changing a lot of streets into pedestrian and cycle only streets has really made such a difference. I think there's suddenly this opportunity. We've taken some space back from the car. We're travelling in different ways. And those spaces could easily be used for something else. And I think that it's a very small change that's happened across the whole city, but there's something that could be expanded and has a lot of potential.
I think there are some dangers, and I don't want to be the pessimist here, but I feel like I am seeing a bit of this kind of the need for economic recovery above all else, sometimes causing actually quite negative impacts on the environment. I mean, I've noticed quite a lot of, I think it's a difficult one, but in the hospitality industry, huge kind of new bars set up all over green space, covered bars, and you know, it's very hard to kind of criticize that in a way because people just need to recover economically. But I think whilst there is an opportunity, we need to take that opportunity carefully.
I think, yeah, plastic pollution is the perfect example of how, when the pandemic started, we had done so well globally at reducing plastic pollution, but then because of like masks and takeaway and like having disposable thing, actually 2020 ended up being one of the worst year for plastic pollution. And so it just shows you also how quickly like mindset changed. There was this big uproar around plastic pollution and then suddenly. So I definitely agree with what you were saying, Annalisa, that there is this state of emergency and we do have to build on it before people forget how it felt at the beginning of lockdown and how like we valued all these good design principles.
So it's about kind of re-educating the public really in our kind of new world. And I find that there's this, you know, when everyone says, you know, we're going to go back to normal, we shouldn't go back to normal because normal wasn't good. You know, we have to kind of really evaluate what normal was and take the good and just kind of develop it and the things that we learned in lockdown as well. I think that's really important. And staying on community, I have another question for you. Because we're all you know, we're all confined to our area, so we're now supporting our community in different ways. We're seeing our community, our local environment change. My question is, how do we get the local community on board with sustainable projects? Is it important to get the community involved? Someone say something.
I mean, I can come in on that a little bit. I mean, I think obviously it's absolutely critical that we get out there, and I think especially into schools when it comes to the environmental movement. I do think we have to be critical of ourselves sometimes in the kind of environmental world, is that we do sometimes speak in a bit of an echo chamber and a bit of a bubble. And I think Tara talked very interestingly about how she changes her language depending on how who she's talking to. And I think that is critical because, you know, there is a place for the activist message, which is very clear and very concise, but there's also a place where we use the right language to bring on people who maybe aren't interested, do want to drive a car, you know, do want to have a kind of carbon hungry lifestyle. So I think it's, what are the benefits? You know, how can we sell the benefits of a greener life? That's kind of the key thing I think we need to get across.
I'd say, and to add to that in ACAN's existing building group, I know Joe mentioned the Households Declare campaign, and just as we've made declarations across different industries The Households Declare campaign is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a kind of a set of commitments and signposting for people to have the resources and tools. Currently it exists as a website. And the idea is that we would signpost to different community groups, whether it's Carbon Co-op and where there's platforms for information, but with that also to have a letter and petition to try and drive things in policy from people outside of the architecture industry, but householders across all tenures, whether you're a homeowner or a renter in under different tenures. But the idea is to kind of basically bring that into the households to make those demands and so to join in the kind of actions and the activism that we're talking about. For that, we have been in conversation of trying to set up a TV show and trying to see how we can get, just coming back on the point of the pandemic, there are very technical languages and things like graphs that we're now so used to seeing in the news and things about the R rate and these really technical things and the idea of a household itself. And I think we wanted to say that actually we need to get the same technical language of like energy use intensity and understanding like a fabric first approach and all these things into kind of more common language and target that through different outlets and medias. So whether that is through kind of news channels or whether it is through the TV. So that's kind of how we're hoping to get that message across a bit further.
Sounds interesting. Anyone else? Take that as a no then. And my final question, unless it'd be good to hear some questions from the audience. We've still got a few people listening to us. The final question I've got here is it possible to design to encourage wildlife into the city? Anyone?
I mean, we spoke a bit about that within our talk as well. I'm conscious that you're just hearing my voice now, but I think there definitely is. And I think we need to think kind of, again, a bit more holistically and not on a case-by-case approach of our buildings and sites. We need to kind of look at where does our site connect out to, what are those kind of corridors that we're creating for biodiversity and attractive places that, quite frankly, birds flying over or animals have safe passages through and places to nest and make habitats in. I think these things can definitely be kind of designed into the way we organise our green spaces. And when we talk about kind of greening our environment, we shouldn't just put seed and roofs across everything, but it needs to kind of really reflect the biodiversity to attract different kinds of species.
If I can add, I think it's accepting that it is wilderness. Maybe it's just my Canadian side coming out, but biodiversity does require a bit of chaos that cannot necessarily be planned. So I think you can plan for biodiversity and for wilderness, but then you have to let wilderness also take its room. And I think sometimes that doesn't happen. But yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Joseph, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think Laetitia's point is really important, and it's, if we see this happening a lot in vacant parking lots, in empty other spaces, and actually wildlife does come back on its own and actually quite rapidly, and we've seen a number of different schemes where a post-industrial site has been allowed to rewild itself, and we should be up for letting those kind of occurrences happen more in the city, leave space, leave breathing room, and accept that whilst it may have a history of being a brownfield site, actually that can become biodiverse and a source of nature within the city as well.
I actually have a question for one of the panelists myself, and it's a question for Studio Bark in terms of upscaling. And are you in conversations around? And I was thinking about this sort of strand of getting community input and trying to empower everyone, and certainly biodiversity and plants are a bit like food, you know, everyone buys into it and everyone can do it quite easily. So that's a great way to sort of encourage a common purpose and impact across the city by everyone just putting a pot outside their front door or whatever, a potted plant, and then you get that kind of continuity of the bees. But maybe doing sort of pop-up I don't know, parklets in the model of your studio bark also invites that same engagement. And are you having conversations around that? Have you talked to the CITB about funding or?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I mean, we kind of, I guess, have specialised in rural housing for a long time.
Okay.
And the standards of rural housing development are shocking. Absolutely shocking. I mean, you think anything in London's bad, but I mean, if you go to some, you know, very remote places, it's just really poor. I mean, we're still seeing, you know, plastic cladding being put up on buildings quite a lot. You know, it's disastrous. So yeah, we are looking at that, and one of the things that we find particularly interesting about this no building as usual model is that this is obviously working with students at the moment, which has got an educational goal, very specific one. Yeah. But we see this as a kind of the students as being kind of quasi community members, in the sense that you know, people desperately want affordable homes that they can self-build, especially in rural areas, but they can't afford it because the developers are putting all that the risks on top.
Yeah.
And they want to get involved and they want to get hands on, but they can't because there's too much regulation and too much cost involved in doing that. So I think what we're trying to do slightly is solve a lot of those risky items, so solve a lot of the unknowns, so that we can, let's say, do this, but have 8 houses at once being built by the people who are going to move into them at a fixed price that is affordable in local areas. So that's what we're hoping to project towards. Not so London. London's very difficult for that. I think anyone who's ever tried to do self-build in London since kind of Walter Seagull is very tricky. You know, like the Rush project. I think that's been really difficult to try and shoehorn in some actual self-build because of, you know, CDM, health and safety, insurances and such like. Although I would bet that when an end user builds something, they build it with more care than the average labourer.
Sure. Yeah.
And on that note, again, thank you so much, because really appreciate your time. And that's a wrap, I think. Oh, and don't forget to sign up for the 2030 RIBA challenge if you haven't already, which you should have done. And we're
Thanks so much, Diane.
You're
nice
welcome.
to meet everyone.
We're going to be more 2030 related events, so keep an eye out on the RIBA channels. But with that said, thank you all so much and have a good evening.
Lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Yes, bye.